When I first met Bono, he walked into the Oval Office, and I thought he was a member of his own road crew. He wasn't really dressed right. Actually, I felt like the rock star on that occasion. But together, you know, we did this drop the debt thing, and my God, there's 51 million children going to school in Africa because of the drop the debt thing. That's pretty good. Isn't that right? Then I had Chelsea torture me about all this AIDS stuff. And you know what? We got to work on it. And, you know, the foundation did incredible work. And right now we got affordable AIDS drugs for everybody all over the world. So these talking chops sometimes do come good. No. It's David Letterman.
I must be really easy to make fun of. You should have been like, I once went to Africa with Kevin Spacey and Chris Tucker. And we were at an event in Johannesburg. And we got everybody to close their eyes. And we stood together, and I opened with a sentence. And then they would say a sentence, each in turn. And we just kept rotating. So anybody can make fun of me. Somebody come up here and run this panel, and I left my notes back there. I had to go get my notes. I'm sorry. So we are here talking about mobilizing for impact. One of the most important things to me about the CGI is that, as I said in my opening remarks, every year we come in and we have spent more and more time giving progress reports on commitments already made as compared with making new commitments. And I think that's really important. And I think it's important we have increasingly large groups of commitment makers working together across borders. So I'll start with Mo Ibrahim. Dr. Ibrahim, you have spent your career developing new markets in Africa. And you have devoted an enormous amount of the money you've made to developing a new politics in Africa, to rewarding good governance, to giving people a chance to build a new future. But I would, even though you've got hundreds of millions of Africans who have mobile phone service now, one of the things that's most frustrating to me is that there are so many examples, including, I plead guilty, the work we do in Africa, which have a huge impact on a few people, and still relatively few examples of being able to take good things to national scale or across national borders. So how can we mobilize to do a better job of that?
How to mobilize? I really think a few things needed to be done. Broadband is still a major problem in Africa. There are 3 billion people without access to the internet. Quite a good number of them in Africa. Actually, I sit I'm a commissioner on the Broadband Commission, which brings together telecom companies and governments in partnership with civil society trying to produce that. It's really unfortunate that the internet giants are totally absent from this. We need to understand that the most important thing really and the most difficult thing is the physical layer. Without cables, without fiber optics, microwaves, satellite, there's no telecommunication. You know, there's no Facebook or Google because their business is built on that. And I was very surprised. Last year, I invested in a company called O3B, an American company, the other $3 billion. It's a business. It's an American business, raised $1.5 billion to put satellites over Africa to provide broadband. And my fund put $30 million, which I'm sure we're going to make money on it, because any investment in Africa really makes money. That is advice for all the business people here. I was so surprised to find a company like Google put $5 million. $5 million is a profit they make every second, maybe. And that's what they put in a business, which is essential for their own growth. I call that stupid, really stupid. And I was having a go at Cheryl, actually, yesterday. And, but she told me they are launching internet.org. And I said, that's good, but you need to speak to your colleagues, and you really need to do something about this. That's important to build really that physical layer. Otherwise, no connectivity.
You want to mobilize 1 million Pakistani women. So you seem to have given, I read all that I could read about you seem to have given real thought about how much you can do from one year to the next and how to make it work. So one of the things I think is important when people want to mobilize for impact is that they pick realistic but ambitious goals and then have a system. So tell us, did you just pick 1 million because it sounded good? Did you take 1 million because you thought it could change the society? How did you pick the number, and how did you pick the time, and how are you going to use the time to hit the number?
Thank you so much. I think I could have chosen a bigger number, but I think this was more realistic for me. And we might go beyond that. And the first thing, 1 million, came to my mind for the next 10 years to come is because I can believe now. Today when I'm here, 20 days ago, I was in the mountains in my home, celebrating my brother's engagement, indigenous dances around the fire. We have no electricity. We have no other resources. And today, I'm sitting with you, Sheryl Sandberg, and all these amazing leaders from all around the world. I believe now. So I think we can actually do everything that we believe in.
Sheryl, how are we going to get more people like her?
We're going to invest in women, and we're going to recognize that women need to lead. So it's the perfect stage to do that, because no one has done more than your wife, Hillary, and Chelsea is joining her to do this hugely important work. All over the world, there are so many different cultures. We've all traveled all over the world, and the cultures are so varied. But one thing is true absolutely everywhere, which is that our stereotypes of men are that they are assertive, they are the leaders, they are decision makers. And our stereotypes of women are that they will be communal. They will get married, sometimes very young. They will give to others. And we actively discourage leadership in girls all over the world. In English, we call our daughters bossy. Right? If you're a woman here, raise your hand if you've ever been called bossy. Yeah. If you're a man, that's true all over the world. We have that phrase or that phrase in every language. And so we teach ourselves very young that men should lead and women shouldn't. And therefore, we live in a world that is overwhelmingly run by men. I believe that when we change this, not if, we will have a world that's more peaceful, a society that's more productive, and families that are happier. And I think we're going to do it.
Amen.
I want to ask you, Christine, when you became the leader of a great international organization, it was basically known before you showed up for asking people to drink castor oil when they were already sick. And you decided that in order, not that people should abandon financial discipline and ignore the imperatives of economics, but that the million stories in Pakistan somehow had to have a way to come out. What is the role that international organizations should be playing in working with governments and the private sector and the NGO to do this? You made an economic, but I think also a political and a personal judgment that the stories of the people out there had to have a chance to flourish for the economy to recover. And I think it's worth your telling that to people. Why did you do it? How did you do it? And you clearly changed the direction of an institution, and I think you've done a dramatic amount to change the image of it in the minds of ordinary people walking around across the world.
Thank you very much, Bill, and thank you for having us here. Three things. One is, when I started the job, I looked at the purse, and I thought, given the mess that is out there, I need more money. So I went about to get at least another $400 billion. And my target number was 1 trillion. Because as unfortunate as it is, if you don't have big numbers, people are not overly impressed with you. So I decided that I would go for that. And we made it collectively. Everybody rolled up their sleeves, and we managed now to have $1 trillion that we can mobilize for all countries, the entire membership. The second thing I decided, and that's very much the ethos of the IMF, is to continue to tell the truth. It sounds funny, but it's hard to tell the truth to governments. It's hard to tell the truth within the organization, because typically people tend to cover up the mistakes. Well, we go out with mistakes. We're blamed for it. People curse the organization. Oh, they got it wrong here and there on such country. Well, I think we have to tell the truth when we got it wrong, and we will continue to do so. And the third thing that I decided was also to change the motto, which is used by some, which is, it's mostly fiscal. IMF, it's mostly fiscal. Well, no, it's not just mostly fiscal, it's mostly people. I don't pretend to rename the organization, but certainly the teams, when they look at programs, when they look at countries, they think about fiscal, because you need to get that economic and financial stability back in place. But you need to do it with people in mind, and looking at what is being done by the fiscal discipline in order to protect people, and particularly the most exposed people.
Bono, when the Global Fund was set up, the Global Fund on AIDS, TB, and Malaria, it was supposed to be one of the first really powerful examples of mobilizing for impact, the topic of this meeting. And among other things, people thought that you'd have a new international organization that got lots of money from governments, but also got money from other non-governmental sources. The Gates Foundation has given them a ton of money, for which I think we're all grateful. But there was no opportunity for just an ordinary citizen to have an impact on a big challenge like AIDS, TB, malaria by partnering with a mammoth thing like the Global Fund until Red came along, your campaign. So I believe it's true that except for the Gates Foundation, you've given more money than any Red has than any other private source to the Global Fund. And you're not the Gates Foundation, you're giving the money of millions of people. So tell these people how you decided to do that. How did you decide to do Red, and how did you decide that you would give this money to the Global Fund?
Thank you. Yeah, the Global Fund was to be a new kind of organization, a private-public partnership, but the private sector wasn't coming through so well. Myself and Bobby Shriver gathered around this issue. George Soros was pushing us strongly. And, you know, we would, as one campaigners, you know, we're into activism on a broad panoply of issues. But sometimes, as you say, people just want a clear idea that they can have impact on. So we thought perhaps raising funds for the Global Fund might work. But And I think we're at 215 million to date, which is incredible. And I should thank the partners. There's too many of them to thank, but Apple certainly lead the crew. But there's Damien Hirst had a bunch of artists who got involved. Starbucks. It's incredible the amount of partners we have. But I think it's important to say that the reason we came up with RED was not just to raise money to get pills for people who would die without those pills. It was to create heat on the issue of HIV/AIDS. And people would walk up and say, hi, it's great, your cause, I love your cause. And I would say, actually, 6,000 people dying every day of a preventable, treatable disease is not a cause, it's an emergency. And we use the color red for that reason. But the heat around that issue was important because lawmakers or appropriations people here in the United States in Capitol Hill would tell us, we're not feeling that issue at home. So to get RED into shopping malls, in Gap stores, to get it on Oprah Winfrey, to get, this really started to turn up the heat on the issue. And that's where the real money lies. So the real money lies in government, not really in private individuals, as Bill Gates discovered with the deepest pockets in the world. He said, I can't fix this problem, so we need a multilateral mechanism to do so. So that's what RED was about, but the companies deserve the credit for this, and the people who walked in off the street and said if they wanted a blue iPod or a red iPod, they chose the red one because they knew that would count. That was the simple idea.
I want to ask a question that I would start with the female panelists and then include the male panelists. When you were Minister of Finance in France, I think you supported making a requirement in France that 40% of board memberships be held by women. The top management positions in a lot of international organizations are still disproportionately male. You've written a very highly regarded and much discussed book about a lot of this and how to fulfill the ambitions of career and motherhood. And now you're out trying to mobilize 1 million women in Pakistan. And even within Pakistan, the literacy rates vary dramatically between urban and rural areas, as we know, partly because of economics, and I think partly because of culture. So here's what I'd like you to reflect on, and then I'd like for Bono to chip in. What is the relationship of the challenges women face in the developed world to the challenges women face in developing world? And what kind of common bond can be established? How can we reinforce the fact that there is enormous amount of energy in these societies for reform, I think, on the one hand, and you may be about to get the first female head of the Federal Reserve. And there's an enormous amount of support for the empowerment of women in emerging in settings more than ever before in my lifetime. So how can we, what is the connection between the two, and what can we do to speed it up?
Should I go first? So the connection, I think, coming from where I am in Balochistan, part of Pakistan, which borders with Afghanistan and Iran, I had no idea one day I would be sharing the stage with wonderful leaders, and I would be going around the world and speaking about our life and how we can mobilize people for change. The connection that I'm seeing with my travels and meeting people is overwhelming, where people have the same passion. We have the passion to become empowered, and people who are already developed, and women that I'm meeting are already developed, are willing to make that empowerment happen. I've had mentors from all around the world who supported me in becoming who I am, and who has encouraged me and to face a lot of issues. It's been 8 years since our work to fight honor killings of women in Pakistan, and it's never been easy. And I've had a lot of encouragement and support from people who've already been in developing countries, and I believe the connection starts from there.
I think we have to recognize that there's not equality anywhere. So you look at the opportunities, you know, where you come from for women and for girls and boys, they're totally different. Boys are expected to be educated. You said told me your mother did not learn to read, and now your mother has learned to read and insisted you went to school when a lot of the girls you knew didn't have that opportunity, and that's what you're fighting for. You look at the wage gap in the United States. Census data came out last week. I believe Chelsea posted no progress. Gap for women is the same as it's been for 10 years. And again, to me, this ties to women in leadership roles and the lack of progress. So last year in our country, women gained 20% of the seats in the Senate. Every headline was, women are taking over the Senate. I felt like saying, dudes, 20%, not a takeover. 50%, 60% maybe, but not 20. I was in China 2 weeks ago. Women have had 21% of the seats in the People's National Congress since the 1970s. What's similar all over the world is that men have more resources, men get better educations, men have more options, and men are assumed to get leadership roles. And it needs to change. It needs to change all over the world in order to solve these problems.
Let me just say, and in view of the comments I made earlier, I'm not trying to be frivolous here. I'm trying to be literally serious, some maybe deadly serious. It is no accident that the first country in the world to have a majority, Sweden almost got to 50%, but a majority of its parliament female is Rwanda. That when I went back to Rwanda after I left office, half the governors were women, and half the mayors were women. And then they wound up with 56% of the parliament being women because 85% of the victims of the genocide were men. And I'm not making a joke. We cannot say we need a cataclysm like that in order to learn to live and work together and maximize the talents of our people. But I think it's very, very interesting. No one could look at these numbers and draw any conclusion other than there is a connection between the opportunities afforded women and the demographics. Just as in the old Soviet Union and in China, after various purges led to large numbers of people being killed, you could see the gender change in certain occupation groups. So what are we going to do about this? How can what you did in France be made relevant to what she's doing in Pakistan? How does it inform your work every day?
Just a couple of things. Rwanda. I was with President Kagame yesterday. It's now 2/3 of the parliament that is composed of women. So it is lasting through the post-genocide moment. But your point is correct. In every crisis, you see women rising. Financial crisis. Take the example of Iceland. I don't know, there are probably few of you from Iceland. The banks, the funds, the government, everything was taken over by women. So when it's messy, you get the women in. But when the mess is sorted out, keep the women.
Absolutely.
They are no threat. They are no threat. We just published a study yesterday which is about women's contribution to economic growth. It can be very significant. And women are not a threat. And then I'd like to quote somebody who said, I believe one day, it's the economy stupid. Well, it's the education stupid, because women have to be educated.
I will say, this, in my adult lifetime, this may be the period, because of this maddening, stagnant growth in the developed countries, the richer countries, this may be the period when there can be most common cause among women across income lines in various countries, not just for feeling and emotional reasons, but because they actually share a common destiny. If you look at Japan, and if you assume that the Japanese are not going to rewire their whole society to embrace immigration anytime soon, something they have been loath to do, nor are they all of a sudden going to start having 4 babies a family. The only way they can get out of the economic limitations their demographic trap imposes on them is to get more women in the workforce on equal terms. I actually have been very impressed with Prime Minister Abe's leadership and his aggressive economic policies, but in the end, they will not work and will not adequately contribute to Asia and the world's economic recovery unless he can find a source of fresh labor. And the only option they have, given their birth rate and their position on immigration, is to get the women into the workforce. So now you've got one of the wealthiest countries in the world actually sharing a challenge that Pakistan had.
But credit to the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
He's making daycare centers one of the focus of his stimulus package, and that will go a long way in helping Japanese women to access the job market.
But I'm just saying, I think this is a good thing that you can have at various income levels. It's as nearest thing as you can get to a miracle cure in countries at all income levels.
Yeah, one thing we're campaigning for in Africa is the issue of land ownership, land title. Africa is, agriculture is the most important factor in our economy. 70% of our people live on the land. Who does agriculture in Africa is women. Men don't do agriculture. It's women who do agriculture. The state sits on the land title. These women have been tilling the lands for hundreds of years, and the state refused to give them title for the land. Without title to the land, they cannot monetize their assets. They cannot go to a bank to borrow money to buy seeds or buy products or fertilizers or whatever. And that is holding us back. That is very important issue. It doesn't cost money. It's so simple. Just let women have title, and that will really help, because it's also still economic stupid, you know? It's economic stupid. It's still, it is give women the economic power, and that will help also a lot. And the problem is universal. It's worse in Africa maybe, but even here, this country is still waiting for its first woman president, I guess. You know, are you standing up, madam, or? I don't know, but it is a universal problem, yeah? It's not only us, you know, you have the same issues. Some of them.
That's true, and let me say, we've never actually explicitly dealt with this at CGI, but they're now, you know, world's moving towards 7 billion people, and we'll soon have 9 billion by the middle of the century. And we already have some very substantial countries that have lots of people, lots of money, and can't feed themselves. China, Saudi Arabia, and a lot of people in those countries and supporting them believe that the answer to this is to go to the continent with the most arable land, not fully utilized, Africa, and throw all these smallholder farmers, mostly women, off the land, compelling them to move to cities where they don't have ties, they don't have to, wrecking the fabric of life in a lot of these rural communities on the theory that this will lead to great agricultural efficiency. And one of the things that I am trying to do with whatever years I've got left here doing this is to prove that that does not have to be done, to prove that these smallholder farmers can dramatically increase their productivity, their contribution to their nation's economy, and feeding people. And we have, all I can tell you is, if you want to do something to empower women that's not glamorous, figure out a way to do what we're trying to do in Malawi, Rwanda, and other places. Help them add to the value of the food dollar. Help them increase their productivity. In Malawi, we have this anchor farm with 400 and something acres, and they serve 21,000 small farmers, almost all women. And we buy in bulk at lower prices the feed, seed, and the seed and the fertilizer and the insecticides. We don't let anybody charge them half of their crop price for taking it to market. We store the crops and help them keep up with best practices. Anyway, we lowered the costs, increased the production 2.5-fold. These women are growing 2.5 times as much food as they were on acres that normally farms of 1 acre. They're farming with hoes, and they increased their income the first year an average of 567% by having lower costs, higher production, better sales prices, and a different supply chain. This could be done all over the world. You want to do something to empower women? Help the ones who are farmers, hold on to their land. And don't let these African countries be torn up by people coming in and buying big chunks of land. They can sell food to the countries who need food, but don't take their land away from them. That would be the worst thing we could do to women in Africa and in some poor countries in Southeast Asia. It's a big mistake.
I might want to add a bit to that. Usually we talk about investing in women, and wherever I go around the world, it's talked about in a way where it seems like a lot of work, a lot of hardships are actually invested in a woman to make her a leader. It's never like that. Working with women in the tribal communities, supporting 800 women by now, we've seen that women are like the angel that Michelangelo actually looked at the stone. He just carved around it and saw the angel. Women are like that. They have everything. They have power and the strengths and skills. We don't need to do a lot. We only need to unleash that potential in them and make them see that themselves, and everything would be done by their own selves. That's how easy it is.
I wasn't going to do this when we started this panel, but you were so good. I think you can tell us something that we're all sitting there thinking. Everybody here is very impressed with you and what you're trying to do. Everybody here desperately wants what you're trying to do to work, not just in Pakistan, but in other similar settings. And they're all sitting here thinking, if no matter what we do, if we help her, is Pakistan so riddled with political and religious conflicts and economic corruption, or at least confusion, that in the end, the impact of her work is going to be limited? Do you feel threatened by political violence? Do you feel oppressed by political dysfunction? Or do you feel free because there's a vacuum out there that you're filling? And if 50 people in this room want to help you, want to give you money and help you get to your million target, can you safely do that?
If 50 people from here help us, we are halfway to 1 million women. Yes, we can do it. We've been bombed at our office. We've been attacked in many ways. There's been times when we had to go in hiding and stop our work in some point where it was impossible. But it's been 8 years. It's not just been a few days or weeks. Because of the consistency and persistence that my team and I had on this, I believe that so much can happen. And I would like to actually share something with you, with all of you here. Growing up, I've cried a lot. I've seen things going from mountain areas to Karachi for my education. I saw the differences between the two places. Karachi is a big city, and Balochistan is mountains, and we have sheep and no electricity, and everything works in a very tribal way. I saw that my cousins are getting married very early age, 9 years of age, 11 years of age. My mom was married at 9 years of age. I saw my aunties and neighborhood women being beaten. I saw things happening and I could not make sense of it. I could only cry. I would go and hide myself in the house and cry and cry. But a lot of times I would cry in my father's arms, and he would actually say something to me that I would always remember. Whenever I ran to my home and just hugged him and cried, he said, "Khalida, my dear, don't cry, strategize." I want to work together with all of you to strategize. We've been doing that so long. We've been supporting women, and I think a lot of women out there are actually to be helped. And usually there's this sense of urgency in me, like so many women are facing this every day. UN reports 1,000 deaths in the name of honor killing every year, but that's only reported ones. Unreported ones actually exceed to 3,000 every year, which is something that we can control. And I think if we work together, we can come up with a lot of strategies where women can be saved and they can be empowered. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We have some Twitter questions here, so we'll just start with yours, and then we'll go to the one for Dr. Ibrahim. So your father, that's a great story. Everyone should have a father like that. But how hard is it for you to find other men who support what you're doing? Do you have a lot of males in your culture who are supporting you now? And if you don't, how are you getting them? Do you have a systematic, do you take them as they come, or are you trying to convert people?
I think we had to convert ourselves to actually succeed in what we are doing. Starting from when I was 16, my friend was killed in the name of honor, and being at an age where I was more filled with fire than anything, we started working in a campaign, and we were on the streets fighting against the policies and talking about tribal leaders who are involved in honor killings and all that. But what we faced was opposition, sheer opposition, a lot of opposition. People hated us. They had to kick us out from the village. It took us 2 years to actually launch a campaign and then fail and just lose everything. But then we realized that it was not their fault. It was our fault what we were doing. The way we were mobilizing was wrong. We were actually standing against people's values, people's codes of honor, something they had believed from centuries, something they had understood to be the right way from centuries. We had to go to them in a way where we could actually promote what they're doing, respect it, and also tell them, these are some things that we need to talk about. These are some things that you need to let go. And after that, I remember, in 2009, I had to go back to Karachi in a lot of hiding, and I had to quit all of my accounts and Facebook account and all that. But when I returned, me and my team had plans. This time we went to launch a project called Project Apology. We approached these tribal leaders telling them that we are really apologetic of what we did. We actually believe in doing wrong and standing against your values. Let's promote your traditions this time. Let's promote your music, your language, and your embroidery. And we tried to do that by making stories, a book of the stories in the tribal areas, and a CD of all the great songs in the tribal community. But also to promote the embroidery, we made a center where women would come every day to make embroidery. But that's when the real thing happened. When we made the center, instead of making embroidery, the women went through a huge life-changing cycle of enterprise training, basic education, life skills, learning, and everything, and a little bit of embroidery so we could show everybody what was going on inside. We had to keep alive.
That's great.
So they make these products along with the one that I'm carrying here, along with learning, and a 6-month course which they take. And so far, there are 23 centers all around Pakistan where these women are getting educated. So I think there's a way to actually get them to be on our team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oprah, you are incredible.
So you see the Twitter question, Mo. Apart from giving everybody a cell phone, which we know is really helpful to people who farm and fish, and in Haiti, it's been essential for people who didn't have access to banking services, but do now by a partnership with a Canadian bank and Digicel in Haiti. What else can technology companies like Google do? In Africa? That's the question. How can we draw the attention of companies such as Google to technology needs in Africa? How can their money best be used in African communities?
The first thing, Mr. President, they can do actually, all these wonderful companies, is to pay their taxes. Before anything, to pay their taxes.
Yeah.
That is the first thing really need to be done. Believe me, all those big companies don't pay taxes in Africa. That is just not acceptable. And people need to stand on that issue. And frankly, the whole taxation system around the world is really broken because business gone globals. But our taxation system is still country-based. And then countries compete. You know, Ireland tell Google...
We're very pleased to compete on that front, I'd like to say.
Well, but Ireland come and tell Google, come and book your sales here in Dublin, and I charge you only 2%, and then Google doesn't pay taxes to anybody. Then guess what? While Cameroon stands up in G20, and, well, it's wonderful stand he took there to really ask for a much cleaner way and forward way. The British government advertises incentives for companies to come and set up headquarters there and to pay less taxes. So this is a race to the bottom, and we really need to address that issue. So what I'm saying is, yes, Africa actually doesn't, we don't want favors from anybody. We don't want to favor anybody. Please stop messing around with our resources. The oil companies or whatever which come and sign secret contracts here and refuse to declare what they pay, this, which you are fighting for with the transparency issue, taxation issues, European, Chinese, Korean, and Japanese big fishing fleets come to our water. They suck out fish, big, small. They degrade the floor of the oceans. And with impunity, because we don't have the fleets which can go and impose order there. We don't have the naval forces to do it. That must stop. So please stop the raping of our oceans, our tax system, and let us have a decent relationship. That's all what you're asking for. And keep your raise money. Because we losing much more through the illicit transfer of funds, through the problems we have in taxation systems, and the lack of transparency, in corruption. And people call Africa, accuse us of being corrupt people. I always say for every corrupt leader, there is 50 corrupt business people, half of them sitting here.
Well,
yeah.
Mr. President, can I just come in on this one? What actually Mo is talking about is very, very real, and very real to the months that we're in right now, because the United States, up until this July, was leading in this fight against corruption. As we know, corruption's killing more kids than TB, AIDS, malaria put together. There is a vaccine, it's called transparency, open data sets where we can actually follow the money, find the money and follow the money. And this is, went through Congress here of the United States. The SEC passed it. The American Petroleum Institute has stopped it in its tracks, or at least tried to, this July, by suing the SEC. This is an extraordinary event. And when you say people in this room, I happen to know Exxon are doing an incredible job on malaria. I applaud them. We need corporations. I am no cranky anti-corporate critic here. But Exxon, in some people's eyes, is the American Petroleum Institute. And I would ask you to think very, very seriously about blocking this, because Europe has now passed this transparency regulation. You have the French, the English, and now at the EU level. It is a wave. It's a tidal wave. It's a transparency revolution. People want to know what their tax are actually achieving, and they want to know where it's going. They want to know also how much. This is the simple core of it, because these countries that Mo refers to, his countries, the countries of Africa, are extremely rich in resource. So why are they poor? They are because largely these extractive industries are not returning the wealth to the people in any kind of fair measure. This is how it works. Let me explain how it works. The Publish What You Pay coalition is just looking to make it law, and it is law here in the United States, that if you pay for an oil or mining contract in the developing world, you just have to publish what you paid for that. Now, why is that important? That's important because civil societies all across those developing worlds can then see how much their governments were paid and hold their governments to account. That is what the API has blocked this July. This is going on right now. And, you know, we talk about public-private partnerships, but this is it. This is the one. I implore the people in this room, from Exxon, from Chevron, who are doing great jobs for the Global Fund. You can't have it both ways. You can't give alms to the poor on one level and have your hands on their throat on another. And it's very, very serious. And activists all across the continent of America, African activists, are being thrown in prison for this stuff. It's really serious. And I just think if this isn't the forum, Mr. President, this is what I presume you formed the Clinton Global Initiative for. So I just want to put that out there. This is real, it's going on live, and I implore the people of Exxon and Chevron to use their influence right now on the American Petroleum Institute and get on the right side of history and not have the red face of history later. Thank you.
May I add? Yeah.
And I do believe in tax competitiveness. That's an argument between me and Bo.
When you think about transparency, one of the best things that can happen is, in addition to the important and critical issues we're in here, is connectivity. So if we get 2.7 billion people have connected phones or data access, if we get up to more billions of people, and we've seen the impact. In the Afghan election in 2010, the areas where we were actually monitoring those election polls with mobile phones, and they had them, fraud went down by 60%. And so the other issue a forum like this can address is the cost issue. The World Bank puts the absolute poverty line at $1.25 a day. 1 in 6 people live under that line. If you are an engaged Facebook user in the US, your data costs are $1 a day. So that's the world we live in. What some of us spend in data and don't think about, other people are living on. The only way we're going to connect the world is if the costs come down. Facebook launched a few weeks ago with a number of partners, Ericsson, Samsung, Qualcomm, others, Internet.org, with an express desire and goal of bringing people together to lower the costs. The costs have to come down across the board. Mo has done great work. Connectivity costs have to come down, costs of using data, costs of providing phones. People need not just cheaper phones, but access to data, because it's that data which enables us to enforce the transparency we need.
But even 2G phones are being used in very radical ways now. You know, there's in West Africa, there's IPaidAbribe.com. And you use a 2G phone to explain how much you pay the police officer or somebody at the Border Patrol. So even the sort of lo-fi technologies are starting to work. But this technology is turbocharging this transparency revolution.
Christine and then Mo. Go ahead.
Are we concluding or are we still on this issue?
We're still on this.
Okay. Well,
it says please wrap, but we're still on this. This is too good to let go.
Okay.
We got to hold on to this a little bit.
All I wanted to say is that it can be fixed. You know, this issue of tax evasion, tax base erosion and all of that. And I think it will be a question of not just paying lip service to the issue, which is being done at the moment, and that's great, but actually doing it. But we should not underestimate the project. It's a huge piece of work. There are more than, I think, 1,200 bilateral tax treaties that exist between countries at the moment, actually more than that. And to undo what has been done over time gradually, where the system actually is intended to protect each local base and is leveraged by terrific tax lawyers whose job it is to optimize the tax paid by their respective companies, is going to take a lot of effort, a lot of courage, resilience, because it will take time. But it could be done. And I don't think that moving to a global tax origination system is going to actually help. I think transparency and domestic base good combination of indirect and direct, but it's going to take a lot of hard work and a lot of courage on the part of the policymakers, and I really hope that that happens.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think at the end, probably I'll retract what I said before in terms of its economy. I think it's the governance stupid. What we're really fighting for is governance, better governance in Africa. We focus on governance in Africa, how to get better governance in Africa. That's essential. But then we discovered through our work that really we cannot move forward without better governance around the globe. And we have a lot of issues with really governance around, from the taxation, etc., other issues. And international institutions also started to lose legitimacy. I mean, Security Council, frankly, in my view, is a joke. What does it represent? You have Britain and France have 40% of veto power of when they have only 3 or 4% of the population, and maybe 2 or 3% of the economy. I mean, it's a joke. Germany or Japan is better than the two countries put together. They don't have a seat. India doesn't. There's issues there, yeah? And then everybody holding the red card, stopping everybody else to do anything, is incapable. Even other institutes. I mean, Christine, I love you, and you are such a wonderful woman. But can you please promise us that the next president of the IMF will not be a Frenchman or a French woman? There are 7 billion people around the world. And when you go back to Washington, also speak to President Obama. So the next president of the World Bank should not also be an American. There are 7 billion people in the world. They should be part of this. And I think they have issues with global governance. Really.
Let me.
This is getting really good.
This is getting good, yeah.
Wow.
We may have to call for first aid up here. Let me just say, no country here, or very few countries, are absolutely perfect. And I agree. What you said about taxes is a generic problem. You know, when Hillary was in office, she went to Pakistan and told rich people there they had to pay their taxes. And it was like an impolite thing for a lady to say, you know, in another country. It was a very good thing. Let me tell you what my experience is. Based on our work in selling the world's least expensive AIDS medicine in 70 countries, and doing agricultural work in a substantial number of countries, and a lot of other things. I agree that we need to get that the petroleum companies and the resource companies should not be against the transparency initiative. But I also think it is, these companies face a difficult environment if they go into a place where there is locally a culture of corruption, and if they walk away, I'd like to think I'd do it if I were running one of those companies. I'd just walk away. But they think somebody will be right behind them to do the deal and make the payments. So I think still you can't just put it on the investing companies. There have to be decisions made by the national governments themselves. I mean, there is a reason that Botswana's per capita income was twice that of other countries in sub-Saharan Africa when the whole time I was president, and it had a lot to do with the fact that they were gifted by creation with diamonds and other resources, but they set up a system where everything was transparent. Good governance from the get-go. You knew every time somebody took a diamond out of the ground, you knew who got it, what they paid for it. It was put into a public account. Any person who was a citizen could get on the internet and find out how much money was in the account, where it came from, and when the money was transferred out, how much went out, and where it went. And so there is no question in my mind, to go back to Mo's fundamental point, that the transparency of the home base was even more important than the willingness of the companies to follow the rules. because I see this all over the world. We've got to do this. Poor people and their governments have to claim an open, transparent future and know that they will make more money than saying, well, all these companies are going to get payoffs anyway, so we might as well get ours. You've got to do it that way. You can't. I'm all for making all the companies sign off, but all it takes is 4 or 5 in different countries not to sign off to create a continuing climate of corruption. You just have different actors doing it. So I think the national and the global governance is more important to get the transparency. I think it's...
But it is complicity. There is complicity north of the equator, and we're very quick to point to the corruption south of the equator. And I just think this is an area in rooms like this where we need to talk about our part. I think Mo is south of the equator like no one else. The Ibrahim Prize, the Ibrahim Corruption Index, he is a warrior in the fight against corruption. But in this room, it seems fair to bring up our piece of that. And these are important companies. They employ people. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I think if something good was to come out of this week, it might be that they just go off and deal with that. It would be great to announce that next year.
Well, look, let me just say one other thing about it. You know, in all the countries in which we work, every one of them, we sign a no corruption pledge. And if it's violated, we leave. And we try to let all the countries buy all the drugs. We try never to handle the money directly. We try to empower people, because if you want people to be free of corruption, they have to have capacity. You know, if your governance has no capacity, you are a sitting duck for corruption. Right? Do you agree with that?
Mr. President, the fight is going on in Africa. Everywhere, the rise of African society is amazing, enabled by all these tools, communications, etc., better education. We are fighting. But there are still buckets of dictatorships. Not everybody is like Botswana. And you have a dictatorship somewhere where even the finance minister doesn't know how much oil revenue they have got. It doesn't take, you don't need to be smart to think why. You know why. And then we go out and ask the Americans, ask Europeans, please check your companies. That's because...
And your leader's on it. You're actually, the United States led the world. Carden-Lugar was an amendment to the Dodd-Frank Finance Reform Bill. It took great courage for Chris Dodd and Senator Frank to do this. And they did it. And you're way out in front. Europe has followed you. Can you imagine how it feels like? It's a big faux pas to then stop that in train.
We have been campaigning in Europe for 2 years. European Parliament matched the Americans.
What do you think the holdup is? That they're saying we're going to give all the business to other countries, companies in other countries that don't care?
Well, you were exactly right. The argument, and it's a rational one, is that you advantage companies that haven't signed up. But guess what? Most companies, Chinese companies, Brazilian companies, they're on the New York Stock Exchange anyway. They're on the London Stock Exchange anyway. And as regards to others profiting in the short term, they perhaps will. But this new rising class in Africa, this entrepreneurial class, they will remember who stood with them and who stood against them. And they have company names. And one thing we know from Red and from other places is the consumer is very aware of the power they have in their pocket. They're powerful. People on the streets of this city can decide what products they buy and what products they don't. And they can take on companies who get a bad image, and they will not tolerate it going forward. The consumer is very powerful now and demanding. So
we're over time, but Christine's used the last, so I'll let you close. Do you have anything you want to say before we quit?
You know what? We circled back to women, because 70 to 80% of consumption in the world, in most countries, is effectively decided by women. So I'm sorry to be back to the same point, but women can actually change the world. Thank you.
Thank you all.